Good evening, everybody, and welcome to a slightly more crowded version of Starman and the Boomer. We've got our regular guest Evelyn on here, but we've also managed to bring on Mr. Academic Agent, who you'll have to forgive his slight croakiness. He's been like slamming the streams. He's been an absolute content machine. So
the Vince McMahon of online right-wing content.
Yeah. Or at the moment, I'm like 1986 Ric Flair working too many dates. Overexposed.
Both ACLs needing repaired.
I know you don't end up like Macho Man Randy Savage.
Nah.
Exactly.
Oh yeah.
Oh man, wrestling fag stuff, like wrestle fag stuff is like really funny. I know some people who know like the granular detail of a lot of like the Vince stuff and like who's been a heel and stuff like that.
Nobody knows it in more detail than me.
Oh well, I'll have to get some people on and do like a wrestling stream at some point.
I'm like 0.1 top percentile in wrestling knowledge.
Do you watch stuff like Botchamania then?
No. They're the normies of the rest of the wrestling world.
I
can tell you that Macho Man Randy Savage, his father owned an outlaw territory, and he had a brother called Lanny Poffo, who was known as the Genius. And part of Macho Man Randy Savage's contract, wherever he went, is that if you employ me, you must employ my brother. So Lanny Poffo had like a 20-year career, just kind of like riding the coattails of his brother. So there you go.
To me,
that is kind of genius.
Yeah.
Straight from the...
And he was very, very gay as well. Very camp wrestler, Lanny Poffo.
That would be back in the day when it was the WWF, the World Wildlife Fund. Got very, very annoyed with that name. Yeah.
Oh dear. Well, I'll get some of the normal YouTube stuff out of the way. Through some miracle, we are still monetized after our 9/11 Building 7 special last week. So you can still join. It's the best way to support us monthly. You can still send super chats. Although if you don't want to pay the YouTube tax, we do have a Streamlabs link. That is the pinned message in the chat there. So please do send us some shekels. We will read out your messages at some point. We are still ongoing with the democratization stuff, which we'll probably talk about a bit of that here. But do go and catch up on that, because I know some of you guys have been like soldiering through the 3-hour episodes. So
I was thinking actually, I'm hoping that because this has sort of been brought to a slightly larger crowd of different folk, that a few people at least will go back and look at the stuff that we have made.
You want to get back to the wrestling parlance in the terminology. This is what is known as a rub. Anyway, carry on.
That's great. No, it's come at kind of a fortuitous time, as we were talking about a little bit off air, because we finally got past the Second World War. God, there's been so much to cover. We've really bitten off a bit more than we can chew. But we finally reached 1945 and then done a bit about the consequences of World War II. But the big thing that happens really post-war is the emergence of the baby boomer generation and all that comes with that. And one of the concepts, if we end up doing something that's more like post-democratization, in quotes, I don't know, that's been something we've talked about since episode 1, and we're like months in, 12 episodes in, of just 3 hours of this stuff at a time, and we're still no closer.
What was the original plan? It was to do 10 years per episode and do a 1900 to 1910, and 1910 to 20, 20 to 30, 30 to 40, 40 to 50.
5 episodes.
We'll be done in 5 episodes. What are we, 12 episodes now?
I promise that's not my fault. It's definitely not my fault.
The big thing that happens, though, is that the boomers emerge, and like they are the generation that their mindset ends up defining in many ways all the decades that follow. And they become the first generation to be raised in this new world order. I don't know if you want to give your quick spiel about what you regard as the boomer truth regime, since people might not have heard that.
Well, if you go on my channel, not now, obviously, but have a look in playlists. I have a playlist called The Boomer Truth Regime, where I had a video called Smashing the Boomer Truth Regime, and then a whole series called Deconstructing the Boomer Truth Regime. And I even went through. If you follow that playlist, I defined some characteristics of each of the generations, looked at how the boomers were made, how Gen X and the midwits were made, and the Daria, and the millennials, and so on and so forth, and we even got up to the Zoomers, and then the series ended. Along the way, I also kind of did like a weird reactionary take on Star Wars, where I basically said that the rebel forces were in the wrong, because if you think about it, they stand for in Star Wars, the Sith actually stand for tradition, and the Jedi and the rebels stand for boomer values.
Palpatine's attack on the international banking cartel intergalactic banking cartel is all you really need to know.
But I mean, just to explain the basic idea of the boomer truth regime, after World War II, there was an entirely new moral paradigm that was set, whereby the ultimate good was seen to be individual self-expression, or something like that, to become your true self. In fact, I was watching American Beauty last night, so I don't know if any of you guys have seen that film from
yes, actually,
by 20. Yeah, I would say American Beauty is an almost perfect distillation of boomer truth in all ways.
Fantasizing about underage girls.
And young men.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, in terms of just in terms of the fact that there's this idea that the way to be your true self, quote unquote, is to abandon societally expected norms, something like this. So on the good side, you've got individual self-expression. On the bad side, the ultimate evil is, of course, the mid-century Germans, the people who lost World War II, and the real consequence of that is that the right, the political right, is basically neutered from 1945 on.
Yes.
In fact, I don't know if you've seen that picture of Meghan and Harry recently.
Oh, the one that needs some green lines on it.
Yeah. So you know how Harry is kind of like positioned himself as almost like a girl draped over the manly shoulders of Meghan. That is basically the right in the boomer truth regime, and the reason for that is that all right-wing energy is directed towards defeating fascism wherever it may be. Okay, so there's like there's allowable. How can I put this? If you picture the idea of the hero from the 60s onwards, really, even before that, there are certain characteristics that you might consider fascistic, i.e., a very strong masculine man who has a kind of heroic will, and that is only allowed within the system, within the boomer truth regime, if it is directed towards defeating fascism.
Yes.
Right. So I mean,
like a 1930s comic cover.
Exactly. Like all of the Marvel and the DC superheroes are geared towards smashing fascism, essentially, and that is the only allowable expression of patriotic sentiment. So what it means to be American, and by extension what it means to be British, what it means to be French, etc., is now this kind of liberal fiction of what it means. What it means to be us is to be not fascist, basically, which inevitably leads to gay trans story hour, because how can I put this? I'm just trying to think of what I can say with it's not going to get you demonetized.
Forget about that.
I made another video. I don't know if you guys saw it, called "What Yuri Bezmenov Didn't Tell You." Right?
Yes, actually, I did see that.
So Yuri Bezmenov has got a lot of. He tells a lot of truth, right? He explains the process of demoralization. You're all familiar with it. But what he doesn't tell you is the process of what was called Denazification in Germany, where the Frankfurt School developed various ideas around the authoritarian personality type and what it really meant to be a fascist. So obviously the mid-century Germans were a very small group of people, right? But what the Frankfurt School and then various forms of Marxism after that, Marxist thinkers after that, started to do, is that they expanded the definition of fascism to include more and more and more stuff. And Paul Gottfried's a very good person to read on this. He's got a book on fascism where he discusses this. So all of a sudden, it's not just belonging to the Nazi Party that would make you a fascist. It's also being a Christian, being a patriotic German, believing in German history, believing in traditional German values. Or any step made towards these things, which are just conservative at the end of the day, any step made towards tradition, conservatism, protection of the family, traditional gender roles, you name it, is a step towards fascism, and therefore out of bounds. So you can see why, when you set up a moral compass like that, we're only ever going to move further and further and further leftwards. And that is the Boomer Truth regime in a nutshell.
We've got the image on the screen of the extremely... He's like hiding behind her. It's like Pete Green. Have you seen the guy who draws those green lines on people and tries to infer things from how people are standing and things like that? There's like the lean towards, lean away stuff.
I don't know. I don't want to be crude, but to me, it's like she's standing with, and she's saying, "I have got a massive cock." And
yes.
he is kind of.
Yeah, it is.
That's a very alpha male pose that she has.
It is. No, don't worry about getting us demonetized. We don't worry about that here.
If anything, use it as an outlet to let us really know what you think.
No, I did go on a bit of a rant during the stream where I talks about the people still act like it's 2015, that anyone who actually obeys the YouTube terms of service is basically like Susan Wozniak is house nigger.
Yeah.
So that's the tone we set here. We do not care. Like the hill I will die on is actually saying the N-word on the internet, so they cannot stop me.
I just like to say, Susan, no, I let Susan know I disavow. All,
just like being on stream with you again. And I disavow. It reminds me of the time I made a joke. What was it? Gas the bike's race car now, and he got so upset he left the stream. And, it's like, no, it's like right.
But to what you were saying, what we've tried to do is kind of build. Obviously, I think the other thing people most commonly know, the phenomena we are talking about, is sort of consensus liberalism. And we have kind of built up from understanding aspects of the progressive era as, a kind of corrupted, benthamite, utilitarian order, and that carries on through to World War I, where it picks up ever bigger, greater ideas of universalization. And we've shown that, these ideas of universalization go all the way back to hundreds of years ago in sort of German Protestant roots. And
I mean, what I would say is that in this era that we're looking at now, after World War II, that in a way starts to be attacked as well.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It leaves open territory for these people just to walk in and take advantage of the supposed neutrality that was created.
They hollow a lot of the Protestantism out of the like Hegelian March of History stuff, which really just leaves you with Marxism. Like really like horrible pound shot Marxism. It's Marxism without all the revolutionary stuff in it.
Well, that's the Mensheviks.
Yeah.
I mean, I would suggest that so there's this process of denazification in Germany, which basically amounts to the total destruction of German culture. Not simply just, no, you're not Nazis. No, you can't be proud of any aspect of your history, and your original sin is being, is Nazism. And I think as time goes on, you see more and more of this get exported to other countries. It actually hits America pretty early as the 1950s. You get, those of you who were at the event, you will have seen my talk on culture is downstream of law. All of those laws about, basically Christianity banned from the classroom, desegregation laws, civil rights, but in a very, very short amount of time, I would say that the American Constitution was almost entirely rewritten by the time you're the other side of LBJ. I mean, I don't know if you've ever read any Moldbug on this, but he talks about like different epochs, different republics, I guess, within America. And if FDR is like the second republic, right? Post LBJ is obviously the third republic, because that civil rights legislation basically overwrites all of those universal laws, and actually creates a two-tier system whereby WASPs, Christians, white people, men are deprivileged, and well, you know the rest because we've been living through it. The culture has been catching up with it ever since, and obviously now it's reaching its logical extreme endpoints. And because America is the center of this empire, what we call the pause then is enforced everywhere else, and in fact, a lot of the satellite states of the empire basically try to outcompete each other, in terms of how gay they can be. So, I mean, Sweden is one of the examples. Racing towards suicide. Sweden has got a national guilt narrative, even though they were neutral in World War II. In fact, that's there's like Viking guilt. Swedish culture minister comes out and says there's no such thing as Swedish culture. It's been happening here. It's been happening in France. And basically, we're about to find out what it's like to be ruled over by a group of your foreign enemies for the past 75 years. That's basically what's happened, without naming any names.
I know. Trig, sorry, we've been kind of talking over you, but we've got a donation in the meantime. Just
we did. Yes.
We got one. We got $9.11 from Dick Johnson. Thank you, Dick Johnson, for your 9/11. Press M for Norm, rip in peace. Yes,
indeed.
Rip Norm. But no, Trig, I know you've got a bit to say because you're a Gen Xer essentially.
Thanks. Yes, I am a Gen Xer. I was, early mid 70s, and so yeah, for the longest time, I thought the 80s was like the best thing ever. But more and more, I'm saying, well, when you say we're coming towards the logical end point, I don't think we are. I think we're on a slope that's ever steeper, but it's been the same slope. I would say before First World War, probably before the midway through the early 19th century, 1800s, and we're getting to the point of no return, perhaps. And perhaps there's this whole sort of great reset that they're talking about is essentially the point of no return. But I don't actually totally buy that it's the end of it.
It's like man loses last bit of despair he didn't know he had, kind of thing.
Yeah, no, there's some of the sort of wider points theory-wise that we've been taking from people like Francis and trying to make people sort of conceptually think about how the sort of the revolution of mass and scale has changed society in ways that no cultural sort of force might ever be able to. The fact that we actually engage on the internet with people on the other side of the world is something that totally changes our mindset in no way that any sort of petty activism might.
Oh, I saw in chat, Charlemagne asked about Stalin's War. There's a little bit of that in the World War II one we did, but I haven't read the whole of it.
Yeah.
There's Stalin's War and the Chief Culprit. There are a couple of ones that we had as reading list stuff we only read little bits of. But no, I definitely think you're right there in terms of theory. There's a lot of stuff we've also covered. A lot of people talking about the Federal Reserve Act, the 1912 general election. And we've covered that to Shell again. That's all in the democratization stuff. That's why I've been trying to cover all this in detail because there's just so much there. But once you end up with central banking, though, it's really difficult to see how this process ends up in any way being reversed until that's rowed back again.
Central banking, the putting into place of my income tax, which I had to get on tax at some point. They're all key parts to literally sort of chaining down the average person into this regime that we're plummeting headlong into at this point. But I mean, the thing that gets me is Fukuyama's end of history and Last Man is one of the if you like 90s zeitgeist moments that I kind of grew up with. Yeah, that I grew up with. And a lot of people were sort of, oh yeah, this is the end of history. This is, from now on it's just going to be slow iterations of the same thing, gradually working towards a global regime, etc., etc. I actually think they didn't take Islam into account in any way, shape, or form. And on some levels, I'm not saying Islam is almost our savior, but Islam actually really, really, really stands counter to a lot of what is going off at the present moment. Mosque is being used for it.
The clash of civilization stuff has a different angle to it that people don't want to talk about.
Yeah.
I would say that I'd agree with Trigger's main point that this didn't start in 1945. What I'm calling the Boomer Truth regime is a distinct moment in a series of steps on a staircase to an ever spiraling downwards into hell, basically. I mean, I've been reading a lot of Evola recently, and he talks about the 4 ages and that we're living through the Kali Yuga, etc. But all of this stuff that we're talking about is are the consequences of democracy, first of all, but then before that, the replacements of warrior elites with merchant elites. And in the classic frame, in the traditional framework, each of these is they're moments of decline, regardless of technological progress or prosperity or whatnot. Basically, each of these steps is a step further away from the truth and the light, if you want to put it that way, and more and more. I mean, you sent me that picture of Dev earlier on, sitting there with his kind of like little Zelda toys, waiting for a pizza, like this. Okay, you're surrounded. You've got everything. You're a creature of comfort, but you're still basically like you're now a slave to kind of base desires. And this is it. This is the mass man. And what I think we're seeing
yes.
What I think we're seeing from 1945 until now is the slow transition, really, from. I mean, this is going to sound weird, but like from a certain point of view, like you'd even take Tony Blair above some of the elites that we have now. Like in so much as
I don't know about that.
Hold on a minute. In so much as he at least pays lip service to the idea that you need to get people on board, whereas the elites now, they just kind of like they don't give a shit anymore. They're like openly declaring war on like half the country. It's like they've become tyrannical and hostile, and I think this is only afforded by the moral framework of this idea that the worst thing that could possibly happen in the history of the world was the Holocaust, and anything you say against that, anything you say to question any of those sorts of narratives gets you labeled as a heretic. And if you think about all of the things that we've lived through, whether you were called 9/11 truther, and I was never one of those, but it was still a label, right?
Let me tell you about
guilty.
A climate change denier,
guilty.
A COVID, an anti-vaxxer, and all of these are basically it's the same strategy again and again and again. There's this one fundamental thing. You're not allowed to question it. If you do question it, you're going to be censored. You're going to be shut down. And what happens during this period that we're looking at is that you have a very strong official narrative, which you're not allowed to question. It's more visible now, but it was ever. What I'm saying is that since 1945, that has always been the case. And if you just look at how people on the political right, the far right, were treated by the American regime or by the British regime in the 1950s and 60s during the period where they were meant to be fighting communists. They always gave an easy pass to the communists, and they always, basically treated fascists as if they were the the ultimate, the true evil, the ultimate enemy, and this is why they treat Islam in the same way, for exactly the same reason, because those are enemies, as Bowden said, that they cannot assimilate, because they're coming from a transcendent place, and the pause can't deal with the transcendent. It can only deal with people who are easily bought off by a pizza and a Nintendo Switch.
Well, I think one of the things with Blair, though, he speaks to, again, one of the things that we tried to bring up, which is the sort of the creation of the professional political class. Our idea of what we call technocrats or managerialists now, these people who are stamped into a mold so that they are perfect for the role of politics, be whatever the goal of said politics is.
He is the consummate manager. He is the consummate manager. He's like it distilled.
Mm-hmm.
It's again, I know you've talked about almost being like impressed by some of the Blairism, because some of it is just so absurd. Like we talked about the fact that there's a stuff going around on Twitter now about all the Middle East kind of Afghanistan charity stuff being all Bush era neocons who are trying to get these rebuilding funds. It's very Tony Blair Middle East peace envoy. It's extremely, you can't get rid of these people. These people are your kings.
I've done real deep dives into Blair, as some people know, and it's remarkable. Like if you follow the money, I know it's a cliche to say follow the money, but it is amazing. Like you get Bill and Melania Gates Foundation, or the Rockefeller Foundation, or the Ford Foundation. It's all the same people all the time.
Yeah.
They fund Tony Blair's Institute, okay? They also give money to Oxfam, and normal people give money to Oxfam as well, who then, because the Tony Blair Foundation is nominally an NGO, right? Oxfam give money to Tony Blair as well. So you think, I'm giving money to Africa. You're actually giving money to Tony Blair. It's insane. Then the Tony Blair Foundation gets a contract with Nigeria or Kenya or any of these African countries to basically administer their COVID response program, for which those governments then give millions of pounds to the Tony Blair, the Tony Blair Institute. So
it all becomes extremely circular.
I mean, how many times does he get paid? He basically gets paid every single way going, and he gets to dictate the actual policies, the actual COVID response policies for all of those African nations. And that's just one attack vector. You look across it, he's there for climate change, he was even talking about like road taxation policy in bloody Mozambique the other day. It's like it is remarkable. And I do think that NGO network is probably more powerful than any government.
I think
in 2021.
I don't know if you'll be able to find it, but I think we directly used, apart from Hopper's talking of coming of age with Rothbard.
Yeah.
And like Rothbard specifically uses almost word for word the phrase like, whenever you're looking at history, follow the money.
Exactly.
It is, you can get like Sutton stuff up, and then if you go through 2 or 3 Wikipedia pages, you can do what he's doing there. It's so obvious. All it takes is a very minor amount of digging, and before you realise how big the scam is.
What's very sinister about this NGO network, and this is just one. Blair's just a visible node, right? We know him, so we can kind of follow him, but who knows how many other actors there are?
Yeah, there's like weird Disney heiresses in there.
I know John McCain had one of these foundations, for example, as well. But what's sinister about them is that they literally write the laws. They'll have people working day and night. They'll come up with a set of legislation. They submit it to Parliament in this country or Congress, and basically Congress is just like, okay, well, here's the proposal. Do you rubber stamp it? Lazy, low IQ politicians. Yeah, okay then, stamp. There it is. And now all of a sudden, your laws are being written by unaccountable, bureaucratic, managerial, technocratic elites who nobody elected. And yet here we all are. And even if they don't pass the laws, we still all jump to their tune, as you've seen with the pandemic, which is, they'll just override any laws or precedent. Like, people have probably got to stop thinking in terms of
To a degree,
law
though,
because it's just power,
To a degree, though, you're acting shocked as if we always have had laws written by an unelected elite that, even if you do elect them. In England, you don't elect the civil service, and it's the civil service that pushed forward almost everything to the party in power. You are essentially, electing, if you are electing, actors on the stage. You're not electing the director. You're not electing the likes guys or anything like that. We're essentially stuck in a theatre, chained into the theatre, the doors are bolted shut, the windows are barred, and we get to vote on whoever plays the lead actor. That is politics, and it has been for at least 150 years.
It's funny that one of the things when I was younger, I guess, one of the biggest quote unquote red pills was the whole thing about the civil service would just turn to certain governments and say, we're not implementing your agenda.
Yeah.
Like, this part of your agenda is not being implemented, and we're going to be here when you're gone. And that is really one of the things that I guess was a lot younger than that stuck with me, of like how statecraft is actually done. That no matter what you do and no matter where you go, there's a great quote by Hunter S. Thompson about the Nixon administration, about all U.S. administrations, saying that the president talking about quote unquote getting things done is like someone in the crowd cheering for the quarterback to score on the field and thinking he's having an effect. Because there's all this machinery going on, and there's all these things going on, and you're really, even if you were at the top of the government, an outside observer, because you're not directly controlling the machinery, you're not a player on the field, you're essentially reduced to being a cheerleader. Again, it's another very good one there. I don't know, in terms of the whole boomer truth regime thing, though, we did reframe it, I think, when we did our last episode. The way we talked about it was that we still live with the World War II friend-enemy distinction.
Yeah, we still live within the mythos of, as you were describing, that the anti-democratic, who are of course fascist enemies, must be destroyed and must be dealt with absolute enmity, as Schmidt would say. And that there isn't,
to the extent where this Milley character, this General Milley, can overrule the sitting president, and you get the media supporting him, even though it's obvious treason what he's done.
Yeah.
For example.
Yeah, that's really the end point of that. It's that we are the democratic institution, and anyone who's anti-democratic is evil. Again, it's just pure friend-enemy stuff. There's also the continuing trend that the propaganda of World War II was woven into its historiography, and that the version that is taught to everybody in the Western world in schools is a very naked propaganda version of it, to the point where it just uses war propaganda to instill its message on people. It's seen by people, really, the midwits who are still within the regime narrative, as the last pure war, the last war of pure good versus pure evil. That is actually how they see it.
Don't forget another aspect of it, though, is that every war since is sold to the public as an ersatz Hitler.
Yes.
we must defeat Saddam Hussein because it's Hitler. We must defeat the Taliban because there is Islamofascism. So it's like or Milosevic in Serbia, or even and this is another interesting wrinkle. Even the Soviets during that Cold War era were seen as kind of stand-in Nazis. Go and watch something like Rocky IV.
Yes.
See the depiction. I mean, he's an Aryan. This is an Aryan. It's nothing about communism. They're not bad because they're commies. They're bad because they're substitute fascists.
We're actually watching a Simpsons episode earlier with like the fake Rainier Wolf Castle 80s movies.
Oh, it's the commie Nazis.
Yeah, he's being shot at by communist Nazis.
Actual Nazballs.
In these like MiGs. Actual Nazball. And that's a kind of a great illustration of that. And that the broadly drawn villain of World War II, of the Nazi, was just replaced by the broadly drawn villain of the communist, really, but on a very, very surface level.
My favourite was always the little recap of the history of how they got to the state of idiocracy and idiocracy.
Yeah,
we discussed that there's all this conflict, and then the UN, or as they call it, un-Nazis the world.
So they can't just slip that in there. Oh, we have a few more donations, by the way, before I forget. Sorry, we had Gibbering Retard. He said he didn't really want his message read out, so I will honour his wishes. We had 2 donations from Glowy, one for $4, one for $3. He said, "Global homo, there is no such thing as insert nation culture." And if you could describe what Boomer Truth Regime is, it's breaking down of anything that gets in the way of the commerce of the elites. He says that. So thank you for the donations, guys.
Because you said we can speak a bit more openly than we usually do here. If you don't mind about the potential consequences. I think it's worth pointing out, if people don't know, this depiction of the Soviets as ersatz Nazis was not accidental. Let's just say, I'm still going to try to please Susan, but the USSR was always anti-Zionist. The hard left have always been anti-Zionist. Okay.
Yeah, that's where
that's why Trotsky ran.
Come from. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was also part of Trotsky's script.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anti-Zionism has always been a core part of, because whichever way you look at it, Israel is a nationalist state, right? It's not. It's in fact it's an ethno-nationalist state. So if you're going to be in any way consistent on the hard left, you have to be against that. So that was one issue. But let's just say that the sorts of interests in New York and elsewhere that that might care about that issue also cared about the fact that various kind of distant relatives of theirs did quite well under Lenin, and under Stalin in the early part of the USSR. Feel free to cut me off if you feel uncomfortable.
Oh no, it's fine. No, that's stuff we've kind of covered a little bit.
So I think it's pretty well known that the ruling elite in Russia was overwhelmingly represented by this particular group up until about 1938. When Stalin started his purges, and he started obviously Trotsky had been exiled, and a hidden part of those purges in a way. It's not that Stalin became anti-Semitic, but he did become. A lot of the people he hit, a lot of the leftists and the subversive elements in his own mind, when he became more and more nationalist that he hit, did so happen to be from that group, and they fled, or they weren't happy about their kind of relative loss of status and privileges within the USSR. And it's interesting that it's really from that point, obviously there's the small issue of World War II, in the meantime, but it's really not long after World War II that you see the American state very quickly turn on their former allies. What's interesting about that is that if you look at the language, you were talking about democracy and about friend-enemy distinction. The USSR was talked about as a democracy, as a kind of democratic friend, all throughout that earlier period.
Oh yeah.
And that language changes basically overnight.
I think we did it in last week, the show 2 weeks ago. It was 8 whole months, I believe, between Churchill's speech about
at the Moscow conference. Churchill promised, these spheres of influence and the percentages agreement to Stalin, and then I think it was less than a year later.
It's like 8 months.
It's like 8 months later.
2 months after the end of World War II.
Yeah, he gives the Iron Curtain speech about the fact that Stalin has taken over all these territories that he promised him a few months earlier. It's this amazing pivot that he does. Let me have a.
It was even lesser distance in time. He was giving Russia jet engines. So that they could, actually keep up with Russia, with America in the jet race as well.
Yeah,
in between that period.
It was October 1944. He signs the percentages agreement on like a fag packet, basically.
Yeah,
and it was just over a year. So it was March 1946. He gives the Iron Curtain speech.
Yeah,
and during this, so after that time, you'll see there's an awful lot of history and theory written. Hannah Arendt would be a good example, but there are many others of basically American academics from a certain ethnic background writing a lot of studies about the twin evils of fascism and Nazism and communism, or because really what these are are, quote, totalitarianism. And I think this is what we were all socialized. Mm-hmm. We were all socialized in this idea that anything that was against the regime that we know is totalitarian and therefore bad. And it doesn't matter if the totalitarianism is left or right. And if you think about it, libertarianism, which is a background that a lot of us come from, or at least we've read a lot of libertarian stuff,
yep,
has this as a basic truth at the bottom of its moral framework that, you know, the more statism you get, the more the closer you get to, quote, totalitarianism, you know, which is the ultimate evil. So that form of libertarianism is almost like ultimate boomer truth in a way.
Yeah,
and becomes the ideology of the right. It becomes the ideology of the right during this time.
There's a lot of soft libertarianism, really, that they don't understand how power works.
Yeah, no, it's not even necessarily just on a power level. I think I my 180 on liberalism and libertarianism keeps 180ing further somehow, because it's not even necessarily that the sort of libertarian ideal is utopian out of some sort of, you know, Hobbesian argument or Marxist argument or however else. It's more so that given, you know, a libertarian society the size of Britain just couldn't possibly work. You could not have the level of trust required without legislation on that scale. Never mind get into the whole sort of technology and how that, you know, attacks individual responsibility and propagates learned helplessness and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's, you know, these technocrats essentially are just pretending that they're constructing liberalism out of something that is just a homogenous mass mix.
The issue is that, again, libertarianism becomes so degraded as a label as well. And there's so many of the left lib people.
It's not even, it's like beyond ideology. The ideology is a waste of time at that point. It's the function of society that they want isn't achievable if you've got more than like 1,000 people involved.
Yeah, they don't get it, to put it in those terms.
No.
But also, if you think, I mean, I did another, I don't want to shell videos I've done, but I did another series of videos called talking about the problems with libertarianism and how it acts as a handmaiden to socialism. And basically, if you think about the moral framework I set up, individual self-expression is the ultimate good, Nazi the ultimate bad. It strikes me that the socialist and the libertarian actually agree on that. They just have a materialist framework where they're both looking for freedom as the ultimate good. They just they disagree on how to get there. And again, it's no coincidence that both of those ideologies, libertarianism and socialism, seem to have worked to dissolve cultural tradition. I mean, Peter Hitchens talks about Thatcher. He's not big. A lot of the hardcore conservatives are not fans of Thatcher, and the reason they're not fans of Thatcher is that while she was radical, you know, doing all this kind of Hayekian free market policies and you know, smashing the unions and denationalizing all of the assets and so on, selling off coal mines. While she was doing all of that, basically the culture almost accelerated towards, you know, it almost kind of like, think of the difference even between 1978 and 1992, for example, in terms of cultural decline. And she did nothing to arrest that because
cultural
at the end of the day, libertarians and don't care about that.
Cultural change in that period was great, yes. I mean, you can almost date at any given look, almost the year during the 80s. There were so many fashion changes, musical changes, punk, etc., etc. The 80s was a huge time of cultural shift in general.
Think of the direction, Boy George.
Yeah.
Or you know, even like the New Romantics.
Yeah.
Were basically girly boys, you know.
Yes, and you'd got the Kinks and people like that in the 70s as well.
No one tell Christian Nimitz.
God, there's someone just saying it's no coincidence that everyone in the Ayn Rand Institute wears a little hat.
Oh, it's me, Yaron Brook, oy vey.
Oh dear.
I saw Yaron Brook once, talk with Douglas Murray, and he went on like a massive atheist rant during it. It was good, but Randians always go on atheist rants, in my experience.
I've reached the point where I don't trust atheists anymore.
No, I'm not. I'm beginning to get the same.
There's the whole thing of I know you missed my speech, AA, because everyone did, because everyone was fucking hungover and I was on at 9 a.m. But my whole point was using the very hard edge of paleo-libertarianism stuff as a framework to build on, as like an ethical skeleton to build a very specifically kind of British mythos and future kind of set of ideas that we can develop onto. And I think it's very good for that. But what we do in terms of the Rothbard stuff and the Hopper stuff and a lot of the Cunard-Ledden stuff, or we use Leviathan and its enemies and all that, that's very different than what most people consider even like mainstream libertarian theory. We're like the weirdos of the weirdos when it comes to that, because a lot of people are very surprised.
I think the simplest summation of the ideas you were trying to get around in your speech was that being a liberal is not enough. Being a classical liberal is, but you have to actually be a classical liberal. Ergo, understand liberalism at least within some kind of possibly Christian tradition, Catholic tradition, or scholastic tradition.
I know you saw Panama Hat speech as well, AA, but his I think gelled quite well with mine, because his was like, right, you have to have a belief and you have to foster like an absolute belief within yourself that is indestructible. You have to have some indestructible core, which again, when we talked about the Islamists, they may not have the most laudable goals in many people's minds, but they have this absolute core that there's thousands of people in all of these countries willing to die for that, and that's what makes them so resilient. And that's kind of the antithesis of what the boomers want. The boomers are very, all this positivism is extremely soft. It makes you extremely pliable and pragmatic. And the idea of almost like the beauty of pragmatism, because within the Boomer Truth regime, the 80s was supposed to be like the end of the post-war consensus in their mind, because the leftward march of the economy got reformed a tiny bit for maybe part of the decade.
Yeah, and there is the narrative out there that is somehow Mises talks about like the Volkswirtschaft as the sort of the mental sort of goal of the entire economy, and everyone is collectively working to it, and it is above themselves.
Yeah,
there was almost a narrative out there by like sort of Randians and Hayekians that somehow Margaret Thatcher ended that.
Well, you're right. The 80s is a great example of many of the failures within what quote unquote mainstream libertarianism, that they have no answer for these cultural shifts. They have no answer for the idea that that the institutions are not just neutral and the culture itself is not just neutral, and you have to go in there with like a giant hammer. That's why we've been talking about all like the Hoppian Leninism stuff. It's not actually a meme. You need that understanding.
I do think that how can I say? I think the Thatcher Reagan era, significant things did happen during that time, though, which is how can I say? Basically, what happened during that period was the almost total financialization of the economy. Britain went from being an industrial nation to a post-industrial, finance-led, almost debt-driven economy. Same thing happened in America. I think they've had a bit more robust industry, so it lasted a bit longer. But I mean, by the time you get to Clinton, it's a very, very financialized economy as well. And
I think England was already there in the 70s, to be honest. England was crippled. I mean, the 80s was actually a good time. We were actually less in debt in the 80s than...
But I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that the economy didn't, improve after Thatcherism.
Yeah.
But the balance of the economy became...
Household debt certainly increased.
Well, it became the economy that we have now, which is China makes everything, or Indonesia makes everything, or we don't make anything. It's all It's all finance.
Yeah,
service economy.
Yes.
Britain went from a hospital with a university attached, with a factory attached, to being a hospital with a university attached, with a bank attached to it. Basically,
I mean, that's like we were making steel. We were making steel and coal in huge amounts up until 50s and 60s, and then we went from steel that also had a hospital to then a hospital that then also had a factory, etc. You're right. But I mean, I look at the 80s with a few rose-tinted glasses, and I've got to say, with regards to the atheism and stuff, I will stand up. I've been an atheist most of my life. I've questioned the morals of many religions, and put together my own moral framework, which is the one thing I find an awful lot of atheists don't. They don't build for themselves a moral framework. They just go, lol, no God, I can do whatever the hell I like, coom, essentially. And that's the main problem, is that when you have atheism, you give up the moral framework that's set out, and without that, then you have the problem. I think just saying atheism bad is a little oversimplification. Because I'll ask now, how many of us are going to church on Sunday?
Well, that's not religion, though, is it?
No,
it's a part of it, though. It is. There is a core part of religion that says you do your due diligence to worship.
So, I mean, my answer to this is that let's just pretend that you've made your moral framework and it's really watertight and it's great and so on.
Mm-hmm.
That's fine, but you're like in the top 5 percentile of the of people, and the 95% of people are essentially cattle who just need to be told.
Totally agree.
Expecting millions upon millions of people, many of whom have IQs in the 80s and 90s, to come up with their own moral framework is just a disaster. It's just a fucking disaster.
That I will totally agree with. That I'm completely in agreement with. Yeah.
But it's not just that. It's not just come up with your own moral system. It's, I tell you what. Here's McDonald's. Here's porn. Here's bloody pony, My Little Pony Club. Here's anime. You go off now. Here are all these things in front of you. Now go off and make your moral framework. We're not going to give you any guidance. Just go on, figure it off alone.
Yes, it's a government-sponsored amoral society at this point in time.
Well,
you're right.
It's not amoral, though. That's the myth. The fact that these things are thrown in front of you liberally, quote unquote, which is the irony there again. There is no neutrality. Neutrality only exists in the abstract. It cannot exist in the real world. I mean, it's one of the points.
Let's face it. Our governments are, and the PAWS and the American government is openly pro-bumming, for example. Well, that's why they put the bloody pride flag wherever they go in the world. That's the international symbol, because they really, really, really care about, whether you're having anal sex or not.
It's not. I say it's not amoral. They definitely have morals. Their morals are just awful.
Mm.
Their mural framework is just abhorrent, and that's what they think is actually moral.
To me, it's the total inversion. It's the total. I mean, the boomer truth regime really is the total inversion of the traditional morals. If you just think about the 7 deadly sins, how are turned into the 7 virtues. So it's wrong. Why is slut shaming wrong?
Well, why
is fat shaming wrong?
We get slightly into the weeds here and talk about the fact that inversion of moral truth is one of the tenets of very classical, very kind of esoteric
Judaism.
Yeah. Well, essentially, what has been put in the popular front as Satanism. I keep telling people not to get mad at the conspiraboomers because they're useful.
Yeah.
You mean like the Frankists?
Yeah, Sabbatine Frankists out of Turkey and stuff like that, who their whole premise was the inversion of reality.
At some point, I'd like to, we've been trying to do the democratization stuff and walk people essentially through how we got here. But when we get off into the weeds of the esoterica, talking about the fact that you can make an exceptionally good argument for the elites very much being actual Satanists is very true. It's become like this great cliche, but you can make a very good argument for their inversion of the classical moral structure. Is almost like a religious act. It is very deliberate, and there's a very clear framework of inversion there. there.
Get that up again, Trig, before we get demonetized.
Did you like that?
Is that what I think it is? Is that one of those ones they keep in the wee the wee wooden lockbox?
I don't know what you're talking about. I know nothing.
Yeah, like the owl.
It's the cliche about the Grove and Moloch and that. All of this happens though. Mm-hmm. They have all these rituals and they have their own culture and they essentially have their own religion up there in the elite strata. And telling people that these are like Satanist pedophiles that were eating children isn't a lie.
Yeah, but we tried to touch on this when we discussed Keynes.
Yeah,
and even though it was mostly an episode about economics, at the end we
Keynes and his being around Europe.
He's a dirty nonce from the elite intellectual class.
He has high time preference. Hence
in a certain sense, it seems to me that there is a direct correlation between the motive to engineer society and the want to diddle kids. These things seem to go entirely hand in hand.
There's the big thing when you talk about the Boomer Truth regime and that the right wing being the evil. There was a very present, before 1900, a very present sense in people's minds of God and good and evil in the religious sense. And one of the most powerful things the Boomer Truth regime has supplanted that instinct with this political thinking. In the Boomer Truth regime thinking, what is good and what is evil is not a religious but a purely political act. And if you are a quote-unquote Nazi out there, that you are the equivalent of like a devil to them. That is how they think about it, and that is their moral framework.
I mean, I mentioned I watched American Beauty last night, so it's kind of fresh in the mind. Might make a video on it if I don't collapse first. But some of the aspects of that film are very, very. I mean, I used to love that film when I was if I had to make my list of top 100 films when I was 25 or something, I would have put that way up there. I thought it was great.
No, wow. It's very well shot. It's got a lot of nice cliches. It's a nice arty movie, but the message.
Watching it again now. There's just some of it's subtle and some of it's not so subtle, but like the fact that the only well-adjusted people in that whole little suburban town there is Scott Bakula and his boyfriend. You know, anybody who's married or in a family is desperately unhappy and oppressed. But the gay guys, they're just well-adjusted couple. You know, they're just great guys. It really is. And then, you know, well, I'll say it for the video, but you know, the villain in the film is obviously a Nazi and he's a repressed homosexual.
The thing is, once you get into a meta sense of the whole abuse, like the massive abuse allegations against Kevin Spacey, you can reframe that as a heroic war, like a war veteran murdering a vicious pedophile in the meta sense. Because that's the whole thing with Kevin Spacey, and he's like, his victims keep dying. He's like the archetypical like Hollywood nonce.
Nah, I'm slowly getting to a point where I'm convinced that most Hollywood media is just like weird sexual humiliation programs for people who have been taken hostage and blackmailed.
Well, we knew how bad it was in the 40s, even, and after the war with the communists in Hollywood. We knew how bad it was in the 60s with the CIA. Like, imagine how bad it must be in terms of like secret film censorship now. And like, imagine how big the machinery must be for that, and how much we just don't know about it. But I'm gonna have to shill and read some donations because you guys have been donating.
I was about to say there's been quite a few actually. Yeah, so
we're about an hour in. You guys, I will shill again. You guys can donate. You can join. You can send your super chats. I said donate through Streamlabs is the best way. I'll probably shill the event at some point we're doing.
Yeah.
Because we are having an actual real life meetup in Manchester. A lot of the tickets have already been sold. We've sold like 45 out of 60.
So wait, let me just do a little bit of inside baseball. Is that something you may or may not be able to make it to?
Are you just going to ambush him on air?
Yeah.
You're talking to
me? Yes, I believe so.
Yeah. I still don't know. I'm gonna have to check my calendar, which is basically Mrs. AA's calendar, and see. And see, basically, I'll try to let you know before I go away next week.
Cool.
I'll put that in the chat though. That's No Moss events gonna be No Moss Manchester. We have actually got the venue sorted now, but we'll announce that close to the time so we don't get anti-fad. But yeah, it's we're trying to do the whole getting together in real life. It makes it a lot more resilient stuff. I'll read you guys' donations now because there's like one more coming as I've been saying that. Yeah, another $3 donation from Glowy there saying, while listening to the DC Republicans, they are lamenting that their base isn't following the standards they want. You need to be a solemn character that listens to what the Democrats want. The reason they came up with why this is happening. Oh yeah, sorry. The reason they came up with why this is happening is the base is racist. Yeah, but there's the whole funny Nicki Minaj mildly going off plantation thing, which I swear is meme magic because she's doing it because someone's testicles swelled up. She had that whole bust up with Dankula, who like photoshopped her onto one of his balls at one point. And I think
yes, he did.
That is like people on 4chan like rolling for 777s posting Moloch frogs.
Yeah, that's very deep magic. Mr. D's Bithoff Bum donated £1.79 and said, "How does crypto relate to Globo Homo?"
It originates from Global Homo, and you should be like scared of it, to be honest.
Yeah, I'll let you fill that one, Evelyn. But yeah, there's to shill as well. You have the whole article about how crypto won't save us. So yeah, go and look in the description.
I was always on Team Gold, libertarian friends. Always on Team Gold.
Crypto might make you wealthy in the meantime, though. Make you a few bucks at least.
Yeah, it's all fiat nonsense, though.
Yeah,
but so is the cash in your pocket. I mean, what do you want?
That's my point.
And gold, nah, lead and copper.
We are going to end up in like a Metro 2033 world where the only currency is bullets.
Yeah, lead and copper, like I said, lead and copper. It's the only currency.
Another donation for $5 here from Dick Johnson. He says, would a more accurate title for democratization series be collectivization? Well, the thing is, one leads to the other. That's the whole thing we're going for.
It's collectivization towards a goal, i.e. democracy.
Yeah, we're showing how democracy really just feeds into all of this. None of it would really be possible without mass suffrage. That's the whole point. The whole point is that like democracy as a process is what did this to us to a very large degree. But he goes on to say that seems to be the one end goal of all the various elites seem to be working towards both now and then. But yeah, the method by which they did that and made people think they were doing it themselves was democracy. Matthew Ivy donated $2 and said, "Get SFO on to defend the Boomer Truth regime." He will not speak to me on air anymore. He's afraid to do so.
I don't think he'd speak to anyone in this stream.
No, I'm going to say he's been dodging debates with people like Louis Levi. He's had, he won't even talk to Harrion about stuff. Mainly because he's not read the things he said he's read. And, I don't know, I don't want to get bitchy about stuff, but I have a lot of archives if he ever decides to get completely weird about stuff. Because he is a character, let's say. And I've been very patient with him over the last couple of years. But no, he will not defend his ideas on air, especially with me. So I'm afraid that's a bit of a non-starter there. But it would be interesting, but he's not willing to do that. JD donated £2 and said Bolden might be of interest for the metaphysics. Maybe. Coney donated $1. I don't know if you know this, but there was the show called Unpopular Opinions that was hosted by Al Borland from Home Improvement and a blurred out Matteo Salvini. Very strange indeed. That's a reference to the Unpopular Opinions Live. Chris Luto, AA, can you make a list of the elite theory canon?
Yeah, so I've been meant to be writing a course called Foundations of Politics for a while, and I have actually acquired all of the books I need now. But I'm waiting to get into AA Lodge to write that. I have a very long list, and some of those materials are quite specialist. If you want the short list, Burnham, the Machiavellians, San Francis Leviathan and its enemies, Pareto, the Mind and Society, or I would actually get a compendium of general sociology because it's just more manageable because the Mind and Society is massive. Mosca, the ruling class, Mikel's, political parties. Those are the core texts. If you get those 5 books, All of the other stuff is more kind of specialist materials.
I've really enjoyed Anthony Sutton's stuff as well.
Yeah, Sutton's is really nice and easy to read.
Yeah.
I don't think it's quite the proper sort of elite theory, though. It's more
not. There's very much an elite theory school, I get. They're a school, aren't they? There's a canon, so yeah.
Fair.
Glowy again, donated $2, said the only virtue the boomer truth regime seems to care about is there is no such thing as self-destructive behavior that harms society other than rejecting the regime. Fair point. Jedi Knight Anagin Cringewalker, which I think is a great name, and I actually met him. It was nice to meet you, Mr. Cringewalker. I actually had to seek him out because I had to tell him how good his name was.
Deeply subversive character he is. Deeply subversive.
I'll be totally honest. I thought he was, from his picture on Twitter, because I'd never looked at it full size. I thought he was like full jihadi phenotype because his beard and he had this really dark.
I will congratulate him from being one of the only people over 5'8" at that. That meter.
What other than me?
Yeah, I'm gonna say it made me feel very tall being there.
Holy crap!
I should just mention, by the way, I realise not everybody's a freak and buys 50 books at once like I do. If you just need one book on elite theory, I'd probably say Burnham's The Machiavellians, and then if you're a little bit more interested, maybe The Leviathan and His Enemies by Sam Francis. If you got those two, you've got the bulk of it. You'll get the gist of it from them. And then if you're really interested, you can get the original text, I would suggest. Yeah.
Yes. There we go. Sorry, so I forgot to read your message there, Mr. Cringewalker. He said, in the late 19th century, the UK willingly adopted arts and crafts instead of mass production culture in Germany. How do it reinvigorate that desire? And the Victorians were a bit weird. They had fetishes for certain things. But that was a lot of that was carrot larping, to be honest.
I'd say that I actually, for my last book, which is still available on Amazon if people want to buy it, although I'm not going to tell you what it's called. I did quite a lot of research into the British agricultural sector in the 19th century and various other things. And there was a big problem that they had with absentee landlords who were basically just spaffing all their inheritance up the wall, gambling, being degenerate, basically.
Well, isn't that the sort of era whereby we come across, that the sort of idea of the dandy and stuff like that?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of kind of profligate behaviour from the old aristocracy, like the landed gentry and so on. And because they owned a lot of the land and even some of the coal mines and the factories, there's tremendous underinvestment in fixed capital. And then if you were a tenant farmer or just a normal miner or something, they're not going to have the sort of capital required to keep up, basically. So Britain actually got severely outcompeted in agriculture, for example, by America in that period, just because they just weren't making the investments necessary, because you had this problem with the absentee landlords. Happened with coal mines as well. The factories were a little bit different. The factory owners seemed to be a bit closer to being, responsible people. That's a kind of hidden little bit of economic history nobody really talks about. Happens all through that era. So yeah,
I knew this one would come up. WNH1 said, "Is the tomboy question on the menu? How does the tomboy question relate to the boomer truth regime?"
Is that Winnie? Is that Winnie? I think that might be Winnie. God,
I think it's the ultimate example of the boomer truth regime. The complete inversion of traditional gender roles. You've got the man acting as the woman. I mean, it's just that Meghan and Harry thing. This is another version of it. The thing is that it's not just the inversion of morals, it's the inversion of traditional hierarchy, whether it's gender, whether it's race, whether it's caste, whether it's class. All of them are turned completely upside down. So in the end, you're worshipping statues literally now of a fucking career criminal.
I was actually going to suggest that it's something possible to think about more, because I know at one point you had linked me to a Carlyle book on heroism.
Yes.
And I would imagine that a lot of, what you're discussing, the complete and utter death of the sort of virtues of, masculinity or the hero and the warrior are now, replaced by clap for the workers, and, people who work in Tesco stacking shelves are essential workers.
Well, now it's even worse. It's not even the workers anymore. I mean, the workers was, if you read Evola, the workers was the mid-century Germans. Hitler was a plebeian leader, now it's literally worship of fucking criminals and degenerates, and we're even past the peasants. We're down to the untouchables now. We're worshipping the untouchables. Let's make them the head of health or whatever, that creature that is.
That's where the oppression Olympics comes in. It's the whole progressive. Are you aware of the progressive stack and all that stuff? I know it's kind of old hat now, but the idea that the more modifiers you have, it's like playing an RPG. The more modifiers you have, the higher up on the hierarchy you are. Like, you have to be like disabled, like mixed race, someone who's like a lesbian, like a trans lesbian.
Well, I think sort of part of the point that we're kind of getting to is that merely opposing that in and of itself isn't purely just what needs to be done. You can't just be a liberal that is against that.
Yeah.
You can't say, I don't want their policy, I want some other policy.
Well, that's what
you actually have to actively fight it. And you would only ever see from looking at events on the lead up to World War II, the lengths that the order that rules now went to enshrine that, it was their policies, it was their ideas. To some extent, we maybe need to consider actually going to those lengths.
There's something I've been, for some reason, I've been reading a lot of Evola this week, just because the covers on those Arctos books are so nice, But I've been reminded of some of the way he frames things, and what he talks about is, he says, like, it doesn't matter if you're white, right? You could be white, you could be like a fully Aryan man, but you could still be spiritually Jewish, right? Or you could be like, and this is what I've been saying. It's like,
that's very nigger as a state of mind.
Yeah.
There's a lot of.
Does this relate to your idea of men being spiritual trannies by any chance?
Yes, Well, I believe that all of us now, including me, are spiritual trannies. In so much as a lot of our basic instincts are feminine. Because of these are the waters we've had to swim in our whole life. I mean, look at the response to the Coof and how risk averse and feminine and gay it all is. And until men are able to recapture some aspect of being the warrior or the aesthete, I put this in the Zoomers are Kuma's video. Until we are able to unironically recapture those things, we're basically lost, and this is why this whole tomboy abs nonsense has been quite illuminating. I mean, I don't want to dunk specifically on Dev. It's just that he's been the one who's been really fucking raging on this. But I've got, like, I always say that I'm a Gen X Daria. I'm nihilistic and ironic, and I can't ever say anything and truly mean it. But my young buddy Turnip, who's like still in school, he doesn't have that problem. Like, a lot of the younger guys are like straight up and down. They say it and mean it. And I found their exchanges on Twitter extremely interesting because he couldn't handle it. Turnip became like the yes meme, and he was just like, he was freaking out, and I thought that was very interesting.
He does. Again, the problem with Dev is that he's a 35-year-old man-child. He doesn't have a driving license. He lives essentially in student accommodation. Never finished college. He's never had a full-time job. He had a mental breakdown because he had to work one day a week at a grocery store.
But in a strange way, that's all of us. That's me. The thing is, it's me. It's all of us. It's all our whole generation.
The whole reason he fell out with me is because I tried explaining to him that he was having trouble grasping what I was talking about because he had very limited life experience, and that essentially a lot of our generation is like emotionally stunted and retarded in a literal sense, in that they are not married, they don't own property is a big one. all they do is rent and pay, and get paid very little for very middling or low jobs.
All they do is be paying rent and type on computer.
Yeah, exactly.
Think about I'm sure I talked about this on an earlier stream this week as well. How the culture pushed that. All of those bloody Steve Carell and Adam Sandler comedies and so on, Judd Apatow and bloody what's his name, Seth Rogen. They were all emotionally stunted, man-childs. All of them. They were all men children who, and that was basically the cultural programming that we got. So sure. I mean, it's not a surprise that there are so many bugmen. I'm just saying. I don't blame the victims. I don't blame you, Dev. Go off and play with. I like Zelda too. Go on.
Well, that's his. He's confided in me, but his dream is to be a Twitch streamer.
It's like
he doesn't really want to do politics.
It's like a really shit Faustian sort of thing.
It is. It's his Faustian vision of himself is making. He's making a living on Twitch. That is his ultimate version of him as a man. That he provides for himself by playing video games. And that is a very, it's a dim indictment, but it's a lot of people's dream. A lot of children in school talk about being YouTubers now. They talk about being streamers.
I'm sure the shipping off of tens of millions of what Francis and Pareto would refer to as class 2 residue men to go and die in Central Europe had absolutely nothing to do with us whatsoever.
Oh dear, yeah. The fact that we had entire generations of men lost in these horrific psyop events that, you talked about, the silent generation was silent because what was done to them in World War II, because they just got you thought the MK Ultra stuff with the hippies and the boomers was bad.
Just psychologically, dealing with lockdowns, I still reel from it in a lot of ways. It still doesn't seem to me like it's an actual real thing that is happening. I can't fully take that on board. I couldn't imagine that in the context of, we're at, the entirety of the Western world that is at war with itself.
Yes.
And there are these supposed axis of Elvis or whatever George Bush calls them. How it's on such a scale and it's such a complex issue that it's not for us to understand. It's almost biblical in a sense.
People joke about how I've got feminine hands. I don't, by the way. My hands are very masculine. But I remember. I'll never forget meeting my great grandfather when I was about 5 or 6 or something like that. And he'd been a miner all his life. He spent all his life down the mines. And I just remember I put my hand in his hand, and his hands were basically like leather. They were just kind of it was like from something from a different world. And I do genuinely believe, I think they've done research into lower testosterone levels and things like that, but I do genuinely believe that there's a crisis of masculinity which is then compounded by a very female-led education system which favors things like group work and other things that girls like, and disfavors the sort of stuff that boys like. And then on top of that, they're told that toxic masculinity is the worst possible crime. And is there any wonder? To me, it's not any wonder. It's almost deliberately engineering. On top of the fact there's no actually manual jobs, the system is actively trying to make you into
yes. It is. It is totally socially engineered, all of it. And I'm like you. My grandfather worked down the pit. He was actually didn't go into the Second World War because he was a pit worker and as a result deemed necessary. And he died a few years ago. And after that he went over to Germany, got Germany back on its feet, helped get the mining industry back up and running. Was instrumental in getting the iron and the steel and coal industry of Europe back in, and then ended up working for the UN. Amazing man. And I feel like a shadow in his footsteps. And I've as tall as he. Well, no, actually not quite as tall as he was, but I don't consider myself to be a feminine or effeminate. But I wasn't socially corrupted by mass media because I was sent off to boarding school.
Yeah, I was gonna say you have a bit of a different background because you went to a pretty prestigious private boarding school.
Yes.
Although those tend to be homosexual factories in themselves in many ways.
Yeah, I'm sure you and me probably have all sorts of stories to exchange.
I'm going to say, you managed to dodge the buggerings.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I told you when we first met, I was in some respects, almost an agent of the machine for a long time. And certainly through a good chunk of my 20s. I was well sold on the globalism ideal, but in a different way. And we'll get into why I changed my idea on that way. You know that, but you know some of it. I can't go into all of it, but yeah, that was a that was a weird old world, my 20s and 30s. But yeah, looking at it, at what happened to everyone around me, and certainly the generation and those younger than me, definitely psyoped. Without a doubt. In fact, I know they were psyoped for a fact. I can't prove it because I don't have those documents, and I'm saying we've got tons of more super chats and so on.
We do. I'm going to read those out, and if I don't want to read them all, I'll read them out when it gets to past.
Yeah.
Cool. I did that. I did that from like 10 o'clock to 10 past, and they don't stop coming. So
I know
they will all get read, but I'll read a few more out at past. But we can't. I don't know. There's the whole. I can't
do another 4-hour show this week. I'll die.
Yeah. No, we'll make sure those get read. Although Mr. EA might not be here for all of them at the end. But
No, but as you were saying there, Trig, that process is only possible by the total separation from history. It is people's sort of the existence as what we would sort of describe as 1945 as a year zero. And from then on, there was a new story.
I should mention. I left this part out, but that's a very astute point, Evelyn, which is that I remember growing up, and I mean, the thing is, anybody who's watched my AA radio or my various other like little shows on Deepest Law and so on, I used to pride myself on being like one of the most pop and cine literate people on earth, because that's what our generation did. We made top 10 lists and collected albums that Q magazine told us to buy and so on and so forth. Well, there's one called Select, I seem to remember, but I grew up with a lot of this stuff, and if you read that material, it was almost written from the point of view that music history starts somewhere in the 60s, and that is a kind of ground zero for culture as well, and that anything before then belongs to the distant past, only to be written about as a signpost for what was to come. And you'll see that a lot with the way that liberalism in general deals with the past. The medieval period is only to be brought up in order to be condemned in a way. And this is one of the reasons I always recommend Evola to people, because he's always trying to get back to previous eras and see them from their own point of view, not from the point of view of the present judging the past. It's a very difficult thing when you're dealing with history.
I feel Cunell Layden's one of the few people that kind of does that justice. I think that's why even though he's essentially writing much of the same stuff as Hopper, the fact that he's writing that in the 50s, from a context of someone who is thinking about statesmanship from like the 1900s onwards, really. It's an entirely different world from someone from, as you're saying, the 80s or the 70s and the 80s, writing about democracy as a process and actually evaluating it for what it's worth in some form of, possibly Christian or Catholic framework as he does.
Well, one of the other issues I find when we talk about like how psyoped people have been or how their minds are very different than people in previous ages is that by the time you do get to especially the 80s, but even the 40s, you start to get a lot of people's pastoral history passing out of memory. Like in the 40s, your grandparents will probably have remembered, if not living on a farm, then at least knowing people who were agricultural and being more connected to the land. And the biggest thing, especially with the COVID stuff, it's the greatest kind of expression of the removal of people from the cycle of life and death. in that when people used to keep animals more or grow crops more, they were much more attached to the cycles of the earth and the seasons, but also the idea that things die. And the boomers themselves, now that they are reaching the end of their natural lives, have become obsessed with their own mortality. Like these weird, like god kings of old.
The cancer industrial complex.
But it's like all of them. They all think that they are never going to die. And they all have this like obsession with the fact that they are actually mortal, that is unhealthy, and was not present in previous ages when people were much more connected to the cycle of life and death.
You see, there's a comment from Richard Crook in the chat saying, unless you're into George Formby and Bing Crosby, it does really, i.e. music starts in the 60s. And I just find that so interesting because the entirety of music history before about 1965 is reduced literally just to George Formby and Bing Crosby. And what does that do? It's designed to keep you in the boomer truth regime. So if you're not listening to songs from, say, the 1920s and the 1930s, you're never going to be confronted with an authentic voice from the past because you're always already dealing with boomers or products of the boomer truth regime. And this is why I always tell people they should read books that were written before 1945.
It's the same reason why you look like a freak in front of normal people for listening to classical music. It's like something they never knew existed. It's like you're playing alien music to them.
Or like actual folk music, like older English folk music or European folk music.
The stuff that isn't like a modern reinterpretation of it, like some of the Scottish stuff is quite good.
Yeah, well, not people dancing to bagpipes over fake swords.
Shortbread tins with legs.
Shortbread tins. I'm just going to read a couple more super chats, and then I'm going to try and space these out a bit more, just so we're not doing too many. But Tim Bowler, so in the chat there, donated £10 and said, question to AA. Is the modern Russian Federation ruled now by the same groups as the early Bolsheviks, or have they genuinely split off?
There was a very good Keith Woods video on that. The thing is that if you read enough elite theory, you'll know that there's no destroying oligarchs. There's always a ruling class. The best you can ever hope for is the replacement of one with another. And as far as I can make out, Putin made strategic alliances with some and he smashed the others. And that's, you can say what you want about Putin, but he did do that. He did
never
root out.
Never forget the wise words of Qui-Gon Jinn. There's always a bigger fish.
but it's always naive to imagine that any given leader or regime is going to completely root out. You'll never get outside of the ruling class. There will always be a ruler and a ruled.
Yeah,
yes.
It's just who's in power,
Yes. Your best chance is actually to become that ruler if you can. But that's a game. That's a really dangerous game to play. Either play that game or get your head under a cover and enjoy your life as best you can. In many respects.
I have a combined $7 here from Jedi Knight and Grinchwalker because he donated to correct his spelling, which is mildly autistic but appreciated. I recently learned that the term biometric state originates from South Africa as early as 1915 because they used biometrics in a form of social credit system. Huh. That's an interesting one.
To measure everyone's skills before they went in and out for their unemployment checks or something.
That's very I don't know. Maybe we had some sort of physiognomy score, we could solve this.
Yeah.
You just got an AI that scans your face and decides that you look like a stagecoach tilter.
Well, no, we were out for a walk earlier on and discussing stuff about this, though, that I see this sort of social credit system phenomena and vax passport and digital identity, whatever they call it, as a sort of prime example of this way in which a society is structured first and foremost by its scale and its relation to technology, then politics and ideology and all that come later. Because, China's obviously got its social credit system. We are moving towards one. America's talking about something akin to that. It all seems as if it's all converging into the same...
To a large degree, ideology is like post hoc cope for what is being done by people in power to people not in power. That is a very, very obvious point to people who've been paying attention, I think.
This is also why Malbuk gets the direction I see often the wrong way round. Malbuk puts the cathedral in charge. I think if you read the elite theorists, it's obvious that the intellectuals and the theories are often, as you just described, the post hoc rationalizations of what power has already done. So it will any system self-generates its own bullshit, essentially.
Inversely, most public discourse about politics purely boils down to, in their own minds, attempting to rationalize that power, and that's why it never makes any sense, because they have no clue towards the sort of grand motives of the people who are genuinely invested in doing these things.
Yeah. Yes says Yezlinik, get entropy so I can donate to you ethically. Also, I'm investing in lead and copper, 1/400 count box at a time. I've been underwhelmed generally by alternate donation and hosting platforms. I know getting off YouTube's a good idea, but I have access to a dedicated server that basically me and a few friends of mine rent. That's where the Nomos website is hosted. It's a dedicated box on like the East Coast of America that we essentially own.
Also, who cares about ethics anymore these days?
Yeah,
it's so overrated.
Coney donated $1 and said, if you were to bet on it, which country would Boogaloo first? I don't know. I think waiting for the boog is a bit of a that's a bit of a 2019 meme.
At this
always
point,
France.
Afghanistan.
Always France.
France is, yeah. yeah.
I don't think
they
it counts in France, though. They've never learned that key lesson from Lenin that, every revolution against the state so far has done nothing but refine its techniques or something.
Yeah, no, literally every time you boog, the state gets stronger and more aggressive and more dangerous. Unless you clean the slate, literally clean the slate and start again. And even then, someone's going to set up and be a right bastard that comes to power, unless it's you.
That's why I like Engels, because he literally comments on some of the revolutions in France as like, they were nowhere near violent enough. Of course they were never going to change society. They never killed enough people. Just like, thanks, Mr. Engels. I never knew it was so obvious.
Dirty's King donated $10. His question is basically, how do you respond to the gold standard with gold scarcity, basically, and the fact that there's apparently so little gold compared to the actual currency. I don't know if you're actually a gold standard stan or not, but
me. Well,
you had to raise the value of gold a lot to go back to the gold standard. Put it that way.
Oh yeah, I mean, you'd have to start with. You'd have to basically. You'd have to do it in a managed way. I know that sounds, because if you just did it, did it with shock doctrine, it would. Too many people would be ruined overnight, basically, because the prices wouldn't be able to adjust quickly enough. You'd have to say now, $1 is worth this tiny amount of gold or whatever it is, in order for it to work. Otherwise it'd be messy whichever way you did it.
You'd have to devalue the currency rather than inflate the value of the.
But there is apparent. I mean, Rothbard always claimed there is enough gold because they confiscated a lot of them. It's in Fort Knox, isn't it? Or did they sell it?
That's all gone somewhere.
Yeah, but supposedly all belongs to the Chinese these days.
Yeah.
Although
the Chinese painted an awful lot of copper and lead and claimed it was gold. So
it speaks to a grander point, though. If you're still discussing the functions of international finance, you haven't gone far enough yet.
No, I was going to say, it's that, again, returning to the gold standard it's still kind of twiddling with the knobs. And there's a lot of the British had gold standard in name only right through from the 1850s, really,
and from well before that.
Yeah. But it's very evident from that point, especially. It's really from the Napoleonic Wars. Is where the Bank of England comes in, and Britain can't afford the war, so they fiddle everything, and that's how you get the first income tax in Britain.
Sorry.
But I think the gold standard won't save us because we had it at one time and it still didn't save us. 30-year-old boomer donated
Turbo Boomer.
Yeah, 30-year-old Turbo Boomer donated $10 and said, "I don't understand this stuff. I'm going to go fap to abs and stream some Nintendo again." Thank you for that one, Dev. Gibbering Retard donated $5 and said, "Want to see some really early global homo evil? look at the treatment of the Wrangel whites after the Russian Civil War. With the exception of Churchill and the French state, weirdly, the English and Americans slowly castrated the emigres and forced them back to the USSR to die.
Well, that's the same thing that's happening in Ukraine just now. Where are the swathes of Ukrainian war refugees arriving in Germany?
They were turned back.
Yeah, they were.
Yeah, Germany turned them back and then opened the doors to Afghanistan, Pakistanis, etc. Sorry, correction, Syrians. But yeah, no, they turned the Ukrainians back, said no.
JD donated £2, said the boomer cowers as you compare house prices.
Don't. I saw a house that my mum bought when I was a wee nipper back in the early 80s. I know she bought it for £13,000. I saw it recently on the market for a cool £250,000.
Jesus.
Yeah.
The value of my house has apparently gone up by about 30% since I bought it, which is insane.
Yeah.
But them's the breaks, I guess. Again, there's a whole thing about basically everyone beneath Gen X is not on the property ladder,
and the boomers were essentially allowed to rig the property ladder in their own name, and through committing their lives to that became their project.
It did. They think they're financial geniuses because they can't and affected their way into raising their house prices, and inflation just does not hit them the same as it hits other people, which is probably explains some of their behavior quite heavily. Glowy donated $3, said make actors untouchables again. Nietzsche predicted what is happening, but I don't believe his solution is 100% correct. Gaius Not your Caesar with the $10 there. Now I understand and relate to why Caesar hated the Republic, full of corruption, hunted in his early life, and then just trying to fuck him over. We need our Caesar to liberate us. Less Caesar, probably more Mussolini in that sense.
No! You can't say
Italians these days. You're fucking looking at them.
I was going to say you can't say Mussolini better than Caesar. Sorry, I am a massive Caesar stan. You know that.
Well, it is more the point that Mussolini does exactly what a number of people in our circles, and I think also Moldbug was suggesting, which is essentially get elected and then suspend democracy.
Just take over and just say, you know what, I'm just going to do stuff over here.
Yeah.
Hey, you know all those mafia people? Nah. Glowy donated $4.20. When is the last time you heard of a young person inspired by anything other than the game streamer or anything on the internet? Yeah, it's depressing.
Yeah, I mean, I know a few that actually have decent aspirations and so on. But yes, mostly. I ran into an old friend of mine recently. His kid is now 16, and yeah, what did he want to be when he grew up? YouTuber. I was just like, don't do it. Get real. Anything but that. Well, apart from join the army or join the police, because that's a psychotic thing to do.
Yeah, I'm gonna read these last two and probably draw a cut off with it. You can still donate and still give us stuff, but I probably might read them next time or at the end because there's a couple of things I want to discuss before. We're gonna have a hard cut off at 11 because I can hear AA just wilting like he's been left out in the sun.
Yeah.
The window is open and he has elite theory books. He's okay.
we put his favorite AA radio songs on. He's gonna be fine. No, we will round this off relatively soon. So no, don't worry, hang in there. I recently found out my great grandfather on my mother's side, I get from Gaius Naughty Caesar again. Sorry, was one of Teddy's Rough Riders. That's such a gay name, though. The whole Rough Rider exposition sounds like Ram Ranch. During the Spanish-American War.
Don't, because now that's going to be the why Ram Ranch is the epitome of the collapse or something.
Is AA not aware of Ram Ranch?
I don't think so.
Don't know what that is.
It's more Globo Homo. You don't have to worry about it.
You don't want to know.
It's a very gay meme.
The Leather Club's 2 blocks that way.
Yeah, and the last one I'll read for now is you'll need to read David Goggins' Can't Hurt Me, and protect his mentality of becoming a man on yourself, get physical experience mentally. you all are smart, but probably can't run 2 miles without gassing out. Again, it's a big thing that people need to work on is being more healthy and having more survival skills.
My problem's not my lungs. My problem's my knees
and your bones. But yeah, that's the super chats for now, guys. In terms of the boomer truth regime, though, a kind of a final point, I guess, that we can discuss before we end the stream. Like, what do you think? I know you've talked about it before, but how do we effectively dismantle the boomer truth regime? Like, what is the most effective thing that people watching at home can actually go and do?
Well, I mean, this is going to sound people won't like this, but the first thing you have to do is mentally dismantle and disengage from it, which means that you cannot fall into its traps. I mean, someone mentioned Bowden earlier. He's got a great speech somewhere where he talks about that you don't apologize for the past, you just step over it. That's step one, because if you genuinely feel any residual guilt for these things, that, let's face it, me and you didn't do it. This is just in the here and now. This is just leverage for various different groups to have power over you, and you have to be able to mentally say, actually, no, you have no power over me, and
you have no power here.
Yeah, exactly. The most important speech of the 80s by Sarah in Labyrinth. You have no power over me, and David Bowie kind of turns into silk and has to fly away as an owl. Do you remember?
God, I haven't seen Labyrinth in forever.
But I mean, seriously, until people, a significant amount of people, are able to do that mentally within themselves, within yourself, until you can defeat the liberalism within, there's no hope of leading anything or doing anything. So, for one, you have to do that, and then I mean, my view is, a vanguard elite will achieve more than any mass populist movement. So I no longer think in terms of like red pilling the normies or whatever, because at the end of the day they'll just do as they're told. So there has to be a hardcore group of people who just dedicated to being against this 24/7.
Well, I think the only solution outside of those sort of, I think, is, sort of as Evola would suggest, of differentiated people who understand themselves outside of modernity, no matter how hard they may or may have not been affected by it, is Christianity. Because so much of what the current order was set up to do was to fight against the last vestiges of, a law outside of the pragmatic and the material, a moral law that existed in a sort of transcendent sense. It wasn't universal by its nature of scale. It was universal by its nature of, us, in a certain sense, not purely in the kind of Protestant sense.
The churchgoers won't like this, though. If it is Christianity, it can't be a gay Christianity.
Oh no,
it has to be like
I would definitely agree. That's
Christianity or like Crusade or something. It cannot be.
Yeah, it would need to be essentially
master morality Christianity, not
a Christian jihad, if you will.
Yeah, exactly.
A sort of suggestion is people stand on their own grounds and get gunned down, that they would rather be gunned down and be on God's side than survive and not be. It's kind of it's the only way to flip the friend-enemy distinction for the rest of the people that exist out there.
From my point of view, I don't know. I've taken a kind of a first step approach. Like, that was the whole point to shill again at the democratization talk, was to give people a historical grounding of like, right, what really happened? How did you get here? And how can you arm yourself against like the lies of history? Like, not to, again, we've done a lot of tiny obese weeaboo kicking on this stream. But one of the things when he was going off the Rothbard, he was guilt by associating him with the Holocaust deniers and the World War II revisionists. And to him and other people like that, questioning the narrative of history in World War II is tantamount to like a cardinal sin.
Mm. Yeah, he did the same thing. He did the same thing on Twitter to me, because Evola was mentioned, and I said, "Well, what Evola have you read?" And he was just like, "Evola's dumb." And I was like, well, what specifically did you disagree with? Which works have you read? And then I caught him elsewhere, like pointing to bits of his Wikipedia entry where some, leftists have called him a fascist or whatever.
He's done the same thing with Rothbard. He's done the same thing with Hopper. He's done the same thing, like I said, with Evola. He's done the same thing.
I can't wait till he doesn't read TED.
Yeah, he's done the same thing to a degree. I think with Sutton before, like. All these people, I've tried talking to a lot of these quote-unquote skeptic people. I've contributed to their channels and I've collaborated with them for years on certain things. And it's really kind of a horse-to-water situation in that unless you can wholesale reject the lie of history, unless you can wholesale say, no, I'm not going to, like you said, I'm not going to apologize for this. I'm just going to say that, like, we just need to say fuck it and just completely whole hog reject what has been said since really 1900. And unless I think people are willing to do that, they are useless. That there is, do the research, pull yourself up out of it by the root, essentially, of the boom of truth regime. And there's a lot of people, like I've heard it bleeding into the real world, that they've said that they've done research themselves, or they've watched the series, or watched other people's stuff, or watched your stuff, AA. And they've said, it really has just like, it's reinforced the suspicions that they've had. There's a lot of people who kind of get it, but they don't have the intellectual grounding.
That's kind of what I'm hoping, is that we have drawn on a, probably with your help, a much larger number this evening than we have in previous. And the hopes is that some of these people go back and take a look through and, in a certain sense, begin to construct their own narrative of how they see that aspect of history. I mean, I think one of the important things for the vanguard, if you want to call it that, isn't just the central set of ideas. It's the central story of how did we get here and where are we going.
Yeah, there's this inherent idea of like what an Englishman is, or the natural rights of people that they seem to just inherently get. And there's this idea of kind of the man and his land and his family that has, as I say in my speech, it fades back into the myths of Albion, really. We have this inherent sense of ourselves and who we are, a lot of people do, that predates our written history in many ways. And there's this idea of man in the land and his place, and you can't really think about that unless you have some level of spiritual life as well. I would say to people who struggle with that, it doesn't. Trigger was talking about organized religion. We're not talking about organized religion. It's an idea of you need to see a world that is not purely empirical. And there needs to be a metaphysics there. And there needs to be, again, a sense of wonder and grandeur within yourself, that you're not just experiencing statistics. You're not just quoting people, the science or facts.
You're dealing with the actual substance of something, not just pure context.
If you can get past some of his very rhetorical style, a very good person for deprogramming is Carlyle, because Carlyle's someone, if you read him, he'll literally grab you by the scruff of your, like he'll grab you by the scruff of your neck or by your hair, and he'll literally be like ramming you against the wall. Democracy shit. Here are all the reasons why. Actually, your free market capitalism's not very good either. Here are all the reasons why. And he's got a very good way of doing it in a way that disarms all of the liberal tools that you've been given to argue with. Like, for example, he won't, like, he basically calls people to use graphs and stats, bean counters. He just doesn't fucking care.
Yeah.
He's like, well, if you're talking in terms of policy at a parliamentary level, you've already lost. It's like, so he's coming at things from such a different perspective. I find if you can read something like Latter Day Pamphlets by Carlyle, or The Occasional Discourse if you're feeling spicy, that will be, because I think you forget, for a lot of people, just opposing democracy is way outside the Overton window,
Oh yeah, do not be afraid to be a quote unquote extremist.
Yeah,
like a lot of the rhetoric that's been used against me by some of the the people I used to collaborate with, who are the loose kind of collective who used to be the skeptics. They are essentially shoe-on-heading themselves when it comes to democracy, because they can't stand it. They can't see outside of the world of just voting. But it is an incredibly radical thing to say to most people, to say that I don't believe people should vote, and I don't believe there should be, I don't believe there should be this mass democracy everywhere, and that does set you apart. That will make a lot of people just absolutely freak out. But it's the only way to work, the only way to be.
The other thing is as well, when you're reading some of those older writers, they're writing like 200 years ago in some cases, 1840, 1850. And there's this, you'll find yourself doing this so many times when you're reading like proper reactionaries. They make predictions that literally then have come true, that they couldn't have known, but then happened. Like, there's a passage where Carlyle's talking about Haiti, I seem to remember. And he's like, yeah, this place for the next 200 years is not going to do... Come back here in 200 years, he says, and see what they will have achieved in Haiti. And, well, here we are, So, anyway.
I don't think the Clintons helped, though.
No,
they really did not. Because Haiti is on the same island as the Dominican Republic, and that's actually quite reasonable as a country.
The problem is once you move yourself outside the Overton window, people are going to come for you anyway. So you might as well be like the most balls to the wall version of that you can be.
Yeah, there is no point sort of taking one of the issues of the aspects of being quote unquote far right nowadays, and then not taking the rest along with them. I think it's the point you've tried to make about people like James Lindsay before. Like they will step their toe ever so slightly out of the line, and will take on all the baggage of being someone that steps over the line, but will never fully go all the way across to actually give you what's happening.
It's people like these people mastering themselves to get the feminists out of video games.
It's containment.
It is containment. Like I talked about it at length in my It's Not 2015 Anymore stream, but it's the case of that they are willing to basically be neoliberals that don't like feminists, and that is their entire shtick. That is their entire worldview.
One of the things I've thought about when it comes to this is that it's actually to strategic advantage that people do this. So it's like, you're a Nazi, you're a racist, you're a homophobe, you're a transphobe, blah, 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 blah. But they've called Jordan Peterson all these things as well. They've called Boris Johnson all these things. We're talking like utter milquetoast here. So it's almost like when the insult is defanged to that extent, does it fucking matter what you're talking about?
You should own it.
That's the whole thing with being called a racist or a Nazi online.
Yeah,
I've had people like when all the shit's been going on Twitter, which I just find funny. Like people being like, you're scaring me. Like, why are you so like? I genuinely, your ideas make me fearful, and I'm like, good.
That's what you want.
If you're someone who is essentially in a cathedral subsumed neoliberal who wants Anita Sarkeesian not to steal their video games, and you look at my ideas, you should be very afraid. It should scare the piss out of you because you have no context for this. You aren't really prepared to deal with a lot of the stuff that's even in things like Burnham. Never mind, the more physical removal stuff in Hopper, or especially
that was the reason why the bloody Stefan Kinsella the other week going on a whole thing about how he's not standing up for cosmopolitan privilege by, taking the jab and allowing himself to be checked at borders and carrying 19 different papers. And he refused to answer my very simple question about, is there no level of this that is too far?
Yeah.
They have totally subsumed themselves, despite how hardline philosophically they are against the state.
Yeah.
It's narratives, it's progressivism, it's materialism. They are totally subsumed in.
Well, it's like, I can't suffer because of it. That's another thing. We need to have a class of people who are essentially willing to martyr themselves. That's the hard part.
Yeah, what just on Kinsella, what used to wind me up quite a lot about certain libertarians is the whole gypsy switch of being like, oh yeah, we're not really living in a free market state because all the corporations are product of cronyism, etc., etc. But look at all the great things capitalism has done for us.
Yeah.
What? I always found that move very disingenuous. Like the fee crowd do it a lot as well. But anyway, carry on.
Yeah, it's because that they have a vision of the world that is again in this empiricoid version. They can only think in the material.
That's why the sort of Mises Institute crowd is like one of the last bastions of sort of liberalism motivated towards something at least marginally useful. I mean, the vast majority of people that are in and around that are consciously thinking not just about Austrian theory, but Austrian theory in regards to power and property in terms of something like Burnham. You know, they are conscious of the state and corporations' involvement with one another to the point whereby there's basically no point distinguishing between the two.
Yes.
They act one and the same. And that's where, you know, you had the whole split over DeSantis suggesting that being unvaccinated was essentially the same status as a civil rights status. Therefore, you can't ask people whether they're vaccinated or not. And that de facto gets rid of a lot of the legislation around it. People were screaming their heads off as if doing that wasn't something that was good.
There's this whole idealistic stance that you can't turn the guns of the machine and the establishment against itself. And, like, tactically, you can't do that. I've had, again, at length discussions with people who have large audiences, and I've sat them down and been like, look, do you think the world is going to get changed the way you want it to be without people being lied to? Without people, you know, without people being arrested, without people dying? Do you actually think that there is going to be meaningful change without incredibly unpleasant things happening to people and being done by people? And that's a discussion they are not capable of having. It makes them freak out. One, because having that discussion publicly threatens their income generally, because it's not something you're allowed to talk about. And two, because they don't want to think about it themselves and the fact that they might have to surrender some of their comfort to get to the point they want to be.
I mean, that's the status quo anyway. People die all the time for all manner of stupid reasons. People die because someone went to the pub, got pissed up, and then drove home. So, you know, if getting home after going to the pub can cause unpleasantness and innocence to die, causing political change certainly going to cause a good deal more than that.
But that's what the
you
ballot
have to get
box
over with
and democracy and the peaceful transition of power is for, Trig. So we don't have to exercise violence against one another. The state will do it for us.
It is for exactly. But it is force. I mean, that's one of the few things that, you know, was right in Starship Troopers. Voting is force. Speech is force. You know, there's enough people that will cry about things that all of us have said at times that we've you know, literally, you know, caused people to commit suicide.
I am going to have to round out the stream now, I'm afraid.
Fair enough.
Mr. A, before your voice dies, is there anything you want to shill to people?
Yes, you should buy my courses on the academic agency, especially the Trivium if you're going back to school, or Foundations of Economics if you don't know your econ. Otherwise, there's tons of stuff on my channel. I can subscribe, buy a mug, etc.
We'll put your stuff in the description. It's not there currently, but I'll make sure that gets put in for the VOD. Trig, is there anything you need to shill?
Other than my ongoing D&D game that is going off on Monday nights on my channel, no, not really. That's been a good laugh so far. Keep on getting pissed on the stream.
That's just a good bit of lighthearted.
That's just a good bit of a giggle. Other than that, you gotta have a bit of lightheartedness in your life. It can't all just be political theory and doomerism. Otherwise, good God.
I don't know.
Seriously, you've got to have fucking nice things going off in your life. If you do not have a light spot, if you don't have something nice to look forward to, you will end up topping yourself. You've got to have a good thing. You've got to have something you enjoy. Seriously.
At least you're not sat there surrounded by your amiibos.
Well, no, if that's, I suppose we can wrap up then.
Yeah, I will do the shillings, my normal shillings once again. Don't forget to subscribe, guys. Normal YouTuber stuff, but we do these every week, and we do quite in-depth stuff with the democratization stuff still. We have a couple more theory episodes of that coming up. If you've not seen it, it's linked down below. We have the democratization series and the rest of the Starman and the Boomer stuff. I will read the donations that came in after the cutoff point next time. I'm sorry, guys, but we do not have time at the moment. And there's only a few of them, but we don't have time at the moment to read absolutely everything. Otherwise, you end up with the open-ended streams. I'm actually having to do catch-up stuff now, which is funny. But yeah, there's just normal stuff. We occasionally write things over at Substack, but I've had a piece there in limbo for like a month and a half because I've not had time to do it.
Something of mine should be up this week so that I can do the full version of the one that's getting heavily cut down in the Mallard, but hey-oh. I think we'll just thank you for coming on, I suppose.
Yes, thank you for coming along.
Thank you very much, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, chaps.
It's been good. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you to everyone who donated. Do go to nomoresurveillance.co.uk if you're able to get to the Manchester area on the 23rd of October. And have a good night.
Good night.